Please take your seats. For our keynote address this afternoon, we're delighted to welcome back our old friend and colleague, Ambassador Tim Lenderking. Tim, as you all know, has served as the U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen since February 4th, 2021. Tim, over his career, has become one of the State Department's most experienced and seasoned experts on Middle East affairs. Prior to his appointment as Special Envoy, Tim served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Arabian Peninsula and the Near East Bureau of the State Department, and as Deputy Chief of Mission and Charge in Riyadh. Earlier in his career, Tim also served tours in Baghdad, Kuwait, Rabat, and elsewhere in the region. Over the past 2 years, as you know, Tim has traveled extensively in the region, guiding U.S. policy and engagement in support of international efforts to end the conflict in Yemen. He has recently returned to Washington from a trip to Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Muscat, and we would love to hear about that. So without further ado, Tim.
Well, good. It's now afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Ramadan Kareem, and I'm really delighted to be with you. Thank you to Paul, to Jerry, to Asmat, the MEI team for hosting today. It's honestly, as someone who works on Yemen, sort of lives and breathes Yemen 24/7, I really appreciate the depth of knowledge and expertise of the kind of people who spoke, and the interest that you all bring. You wouldn't be here if you weren't interested or working on some aspect of what's going on there. And my friends, it is a hopeful moment. And that's not something that we've been able to say too often about conflicts in the Middle East, and certainly not in Yemen over the last 8 years, but it is a hopeful moment. And we have to apply every ounce of diplomatic pressure and support in concert with partners, the conflict parties who are making some very tough decisions and having discussions about the way forward. They must come together at this time, because to allow Yemen to slip back into war will be devastating for not only Yemen, the Yemeni people, but for the region as well. And that's why I say this is the best opportunity for peace that Yemen has had since this war began. We absolutely must take full advantage of the positive strands that are emerging here. It's only through this process, after all, that we are able to tackle, as an international community, as a community of scholars and advocates, the larger issues that Yemen will confront down the road, as Helen Lackner said, about water, resources, and similar issues, at all of the economic challenges. You can't do that if there's a war on. You can't do that if the parties aren't talking to each other. So our efforts are very much focused on keeping the parties moving together, making tough decisions, compromising, and bringing the brunt and the power of the United States, of the international community, of the regional parties, of the neighbors, to achieve success and end the war. The Biden administration is committed to advancing a durable resolution to the Yemen conflict that helps reverse Yemen's dire economic crisis, paves the way for justice and accountability, and puts Yemen on a path to prosperity and a brighter future for all. More than 8 years of war and division have devastated Yemen's economy and pushed its institutions to the brink, leaving families unable to buy basic goods, feed their children, or access basic care. We know the scars of this war go far below the surface. The war has deepened divisions within society, robbed Yemen's youth of education and opportunity and led to the spread of hate, violence, and extremist ideologies. We know that it will take years to heal these wounds. The U.S. is committed to supporting Yemenis as they seek to do so. The UN-mediated truce and resulting period of de-escalation was a positive step, but it was not enough. The first step towards a durable resolution is through an inclusive Yemeni political process. Peace process must also incorporate Yemenis' calls for justice and accountability for human rights violations and abuses, along with efforts to repair the deep divisions within Yemeni society. It must incorporate voices from across the country, including from women and marginalized groups. Finally, it must be complemented by a recovery effort that enjoys strong support from regional and international partners, is closely coordinated with the political process, and strengthens economic cooperation between Yemen and its neighbors. We've witnessed over a year of de-escalation in Yemen following the initiation of the truce on April 2nd, 2022. You saw the statements from the White House and the State Department over the weekend, heralding this very important milestone. This period of calm has saved thousands of lives. While some fighting continues on the ground, including unacceptable Houthi attacks against Yemen government officials and economic infrastructure, we have not seen any major offensives, cross-border attacks, or airstrikes for over a year. We also welcome the resumption of commercial flights from Sana'a Airport for the first time since 2016, and the unimpeded flow of fuel and other essential goods through Hodeidah ports. Most importantly, intensive discussions between the parties continue. The focus of these discussions remains securing a new, more comprehensive UN-mediated agreement that paves the way for a political process. I continue to coordinate closely with the UN Special Envoy, Hans Grunberg, regional partners, and the Yemen government to support efforts to reach such an agreement. We are urging the parties to seize this opportunity, recognizing that an agreement will require compromises from all parties. Diplomacy takes time, and while a new agreement is urgently needed, we must also maintain space for diplomacy. The announcement on March 20th of a UN and ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, mediated agreement to release nearly 900 detainees is an important step and a positive indication of the parties' ability to negotiate. There's still 1,400 other prisoners that must be negotiated and released. We look forward to the physical release of these prisoners in the near term. As we've heard from others here today, we have much work to do now to help prepare and strengthen the foundation for a durable peace. In addition to our intensive diplomatic efforts, the United States is committed to doing what we can now to mitigate the humanitarian crisis. On February 27th, the Secretary announced more than $444 million in new humanitarian aid to Yemen, bringing our total contributions to over $5.4 billion since the conflict began. Such life-saving humanitarian assistance is critical, and much more is needed. Humanitarians face over a $3 billion gap in the 2023 response. We know, however, that after almost 9 years of war, Yemenis need much more than humanitarian assistance. That is why the United States is also supporting a variety of recovery and development projects, including assistance to promote economic stability, expand livelihood opportunities, strengthen healthcare and education systems, and support local level conflict mitigation. Yemenis must see the tangible benefits that the peace process can bring. And that is why the U.S. is committed to working with other donors, especially those in the region, to ensure we are prepared to scale up assistance as peace efforts progress. While the U.S. is committed to working with partners to support Yemen's peace and recovery process, only Yemenis can determine the future of their country. Yemeni civil society must play a central role in efforts to prepare for Yemen's peace and recovery process. Strong, coordinated efforts from diverse Yemeni groups can help build support for and shape Yemen's peace process. It's really an honor to be here today with such civil society leaders and experts, scholars, and we applaud the important work that you and these groups and individuals are doing. I want to close with just a minute on the Safar tanker. While all of this conflict is going on in Yemen, you may know that there is a tanker full of 1.1 million barrels of oil off the coast of Yemen. It's been there for 40 years. It has played a role in the past as an oil platform to export Yemen's oil. There's no oil flowing through those pipelines now because of the war. That ship is unmaintained. It could leak. It could degrade at any moment. It is well past its prime. The ship needs to be retired. We've joined the UN in leading an international effort to raise money to move another ship alongside the Safar tanker, offload the oil from the Safar onto the secure vessel, and pull the Safar to port and sell it for scrap. It's a delicate operation. It takes a lot of work, but we were very happy to see that the UN purchased a vessel last month using the funds that we all had raised. That vessel is set to set sail from its port to the Yemen coast during the month of April. This is an urgent operation. We call on all those who want to safeguard Yemen's maritime biodiversity and indeed the entire coastline of the Red Sea. We call on the private sector, environmental groups, and regional actors to continue to support this effort. Help us close the remaining $34 million funding gap. Let's get this done. It is not part of the peace process. It is a separate issue, but the fact that the Houthis and the UN and the Yemen government signed an agreement a year ago allowing this process to move forward, again, not an opportunity that we can afford to miss. Let's do it all. This is the year for peace in Yemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. And it's as you said, a hopeful moment in this 8-year conflict. So you were just out in the region and had an opportunity to talk to all the key players. And what's your takeaway on all of this? Are you of the view that the parties, including especially the Houthis, ready really to come to the table and find a solution?
I mean, I think they're from all the travel that I do, particularly to the Gulf region, but also to Yemen, and hearing your comments, the fatigue that has settled into the country in terms of the desire to get beyond war and tackle some of these issues, I think is very palpable. It doesn't mean it's going to translate into a peace agreement. I think there's some very tough issues out there. As you know, the issue that stalled out the truce on October 2nd was the demand by the Houthis for salaries to be paid, particularly to the militants and the security officials on the Houthi side. That was very difficult ask to make. At that moment, the truce was not renewed at that point, but on October 3rd, bombs did not fall, cross-border attacks did not resume. And since that period, we have seen intensive dialogue, I think, that's happening among key actors. I think there's a very strong commitment to ensuring that the Yemen government is part of this process and helps to lead it, that this becomes a UN-led process, as has helped get us to this point. And I think if you couple that, Jerry, with the fact that prisoners are going to be released in large numbers in the near future, that there's an ongoing effort, as I said, on the Safar, which is separate, but also shows a willingness of the parties to deal with a vexing problem. I think these elements coming together with support from the region, because none of this is going to happen without Saudi Arabia's support, without the support of the UAE and the Omanis in particular, and other Gulf countries. So this is an opportunity, I think, where we can mobilize and try and push through an open door with the GCC and the support of the Gulf Cooperation Council to realize some of the difficult steps that have to be accomplished.
So just to clarify, the process right now as you said, is really just to extend the ceasefire. And then that would lead into a political negotiation. Hans Grunberg, a few days ago, said that there is an agreement among the parties to meet in May, I guess, after the Eid. Is that all nested together, or all of these pieces working in a coordinated fashion?
I mean, I wish I could say they're, seamlessly nested together. I don't think that's really the case, but I do think that that they are coming together.
Okay.
So I don't want to suggest that any of this is a done deal. I think there's some very hard compromise and decision making and diplomacy that needs to happen. There needs to be continued restraint, and the Yemenis need to see the elements of the truce continue that have brought benefit to Yemenis. That is the commercial flights from Sana'a to Amman, Jordan, which have airlifted some 100,000 Yemenis to Amman, Jordan, to reunite with their families, to get medical care. The fact that there's de-escalation and a huge drop in civilian casualties over the last year, that there's more oil coming onto the market with fewer impediments from the port procedures. These are very important developments, I think. And so there is an opportunity here. I think everybody recognizes it. And I think these efforts will coalesce more. But again, I point to small steps, but very significant. For those of you who watched the file, the prisoner release, again, as I mentioned, and the discussions that are going on amongst the conflict parties, shows a determination and a willingness to explore a diplomatic solution to the conflict.
Okay. And there's been a lot of interest, of course, ever since the announcement of the reestablishment of diplomatic relations between the Saudis and Iran, whether Iran was going to try to play a helpful role, presumably in encouraging the Houthis to come to the table. Are we seeing any change in Iranian attitudes? Are they at least quietly trying to facilitate dialogue?
I won't speak for the Iranians or indeed the Saudis on this particular issue, but I think, we've welcomed this development. I think it will be determined over time how close the Saudis and the Iranians can get in realizing the objectives that they've stated, which is to reestablish diplomatic relations, opening of embassies. But I know from my conversations with the Saudis, they are going to be watching the Yemen space. And if the Iranians want to show that they are really turning a corner on the conflict, then there won't be smuggling of weapons to the Houthis anymore in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. As was discussed earlier, there are narcotics being smuggled to Yemen in violation of Security Council resolutions and to the detriment of Yemeni society. So this is an area, I think, where the Iranians are going to have to demonstrate their commitment. We appreciated when the Iranians welcomed the truce, when it was first announced on April 2nd last year, again in June, when the truce was extended. We also would like to see the Iranians show support for the political process that we hope is coming. It's not just the interdiction or the smuggling efforts that we want to see progress on, but it is Iran supporting a political process. All that said, I would make the following point, that no agreement between regional actors, Saudis, the Iranians, the Emiratis, the Houthis, the Saud, none of that equates to an end of the conflict, because you have to have the Yemeni piece to deal with some of the big challenges that our colleagues talked about earlier: resource allocation, the southern question. That's not for the outsiders to decide. We count on Yemenis coming around the table and being able to work through these issues. And there's past experiences, through the national dialogue, where Yemenis have shown a determination to open the tent and bring all elements of society together. And we are looking forward to that moment when Yemenis can come together and decide the fate of their country.
Yeah, I think it's a critical issue, and I think it's one that often is lost here in the U.S. that an agreement to end Saudi Arabia's engagement in the conflict does not mean an end to the conflict.
That's right.
This is a civil war, and it will only end when there's an agreement amongst the Yemenis themselves to end it. You, of course, have been, I think, the principal partner really for the UN Special Envoy since 2021, and have played a role in that. But you've also been a major player in the Friends of Yemen organization of supporting international partners. You talked a little bit about the important role that the international community will play in any kind of post-conflict or conflict-ending situation. So where are you? Are you thinking now about the possibility of reconvening the Friends, of trying to begin to think about how the international community will support Yemen reconstruction?
Well, we certainly are. I think we want to be prepared for that moment, even if it is not at this particular time, but looking ahead to the kind of recovery efforts that a peace process needs to be paired with. I think we are going to be looking and relying on and coordinating very closely with regional actors. I think Saudi Arabia knows you can't just leave Yemen, and we could name other countries. You can't just leave Yemen and have a mess or chaotic situation on the border. That's not good for stability in this region. That's not good for our broader efforts to end the menace of al-Qaeda and Daesh, which still exist in Yemen and are still a force to be reckoned with. So to be able to bring the institutions of Yemen to bear and the capabilities to fight the threat of terrorism, I think is very important. But the recovery effort, I think, is going to be key. And what I want to say, speaking on behalf of the United States, is that we're in it to the end, right? Not in it just to have another ceasefire and the start of our process. We want to be of help to the Yemeni people and to the region as they go through what we hope they will go through in the near future, an opportunity to participate in a dialogue that helps shape the future of their country.
All right. So, the proof of how optimistic you are will be whether or not you've begun to think about onward assignments.
I'm sticking with what I've got. This is something that I love. I've got several of my teammates here. We believe in this mission. The president asked us to take on this responsibility 2 years ago. We have his full support. We have the support of the Secretary of State. It's very much a team effort. And of course, working with the regional actors who I think are determined to see the conflict ended. That sounds great, but how is the peace implemented are very difficult questions. This is a country that has been at war for 7 or 8 years. As I mentioned, the divisions are deep. The need for reconciliation, as noted before, is sure. And the rebuilding of institutions that allows the country to govern itself and for the Yemeni people to have that. This is a tough road, and I think we want to stick with it as the United States.
Right. Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you for coming in and sharing what we hope is a very promising moment, and to look forward. And as we know, and as we've discussed already this morning, nobody, I think, should leave this room today thinking that we're seeing the end of the process. We're seeing, hopefully, the beginning of what is going to be a very long period of reconstruction, rehabilitation. Country has suffered tremendously over these years. Greatly appreciate the role that you've played in trying to help people get to the starting point, and good luck.
Thank you. And to all the Yemenis in the room and on the screen, this is very much a team effort, and we recognize the important role that many of you are playing quietly through your organizations, through your own advocacy efforts. It's very much appreciated. We like to keep in touch with you. You know the country, we don't. We need to learn it. And we greatly value the correspondence and the interaction that we have with you. But thank you for hosting this session on Yemen, giving it some attention when there's so many other demands on everybody's time and the role of policy. But thank you for hosting and having me.
Great. Thank you, Tim. So we will take a 15-minute break.